to address zinc, which I will eventually, I don't talk about zinc a lot. It's very important. But we'll get into more about zinc shortly. To understand what I'm going to talk about zinc, we need to cover some basics that we've talked about before. We're going to talk about it again since it hardly ever gets addressed, and that is whole food nutrition, which we really shouldn't have to say whole food nutrition, which virtually nobody knows about. Okay? It's begun to get a little popular, so you're seeing a lot of supplements in the marketplace. Well, I shouldn't say a lot. You're seeing more than there ever has been before. About 2 years ago, the front cover of the New Year's edition of the Health Food Store trade journal, I think Natural Merchandiser, I forget the name exactly, but it's what all the health food stores get. It tells them what's going on, you know, what new products to buy, and you know, it promotes old products, new products. Well, the covers on the cover, one of the stories was that it reported a record year for whole food nutrients. Okay, now to people that are especially watching this video and those that are here and hearing this for the first time, kind of going, what do you mean going down to Whole Foods Market? No, I'm not talking about Whole Foods Market. And some people have told me you need to stop talking about whole food nutrition because they think you're talking about Whole Foods Market. No, long before there was a Whole Foods Market, there was whole food nutrition. What is that? Nutrients from food, which really is a redundancy. Because if nutrients aren't formed in food, they're not nutrients. And yet virtually everything in the marketplace, whether it's at the pharmacy, at Walgreens, Walmart, Kroger's, grocery stores, health food stores, the vast majority of everything on the store shelf is not food, nor has it ever been food. And they call them nutrients because it's a marketing scam, it's a marketing sham. And this has been known for more than 100 years by a few. It's been documented for more than 100 years. Items that cause life are food. Plants that we eat or animals that we eat that eat the plants. That's how they get to be the animal and have the nutrients they have. Okay. How many people have seen cows go out in the field and start licking up rocks and chewing them up? Anybody ever seen that? Okay. They don't eat rocks. Okay. Animals don't eat rocks. Okay. Plants eat rocks. Now, things that are in the soil. Inorganic, non-living elemental matter. And through the mystery of photosynthesis, which is still a mystery to man today, and we have some understanding of it, but we don't really know how these things occur. Through photosynthesis, these inanimate minerals, rocks, are transformed into a form that our body utilizes. If we eat those things, our body has little or no use for them. In fact, they can even be toxic, and they are often toxic. But often there's what I call slow poisons. They don't kill you today or tomorrow or next month or even in a year. Well, some of them do, but mostly they don't. They're just really inferior. It's not the way your body's intended to function. Okay, we are not chemical beings as marketing has told us for 100 years. Better living through chemistry. That's a lie. That's a marketing campaign. Okay, we are not chemical beings. We are biochemical. We are biological. We are biophysical. We are multifaceted beings. Plants, through photosynthesis, convert that which can't give us life into a form that gives us life. That's nutrition. That's whole food nutrition. We shouldn't have to say whole food, because if it isn't grown, it's not a nutrient. But virtually everything on the store shelf everywhere is not grown. So about 2 years ago, the Health Food Store publication said there was a record year for whole food nutrients. 5% of all nutrient sales were whole food nutrients. And that was big news. When I saw that, I laughed. I said, the headline should be 95% of everything being sold today is still trash. But that wasn't the headline. The headline was 5%. And the truth is, it wasn't even 5%. Because more than 10 years ago, when there started to be a few more companies with whole food nutrients, and initially I got excited. And I started looking at these products and I went, well, let's wait. Because I've been doing this through 5 decades now. And when people have listened to me and followed through after listening and taking the action that I tell them, make sure your nutrients are food, because if they're not food, they really aren't nutrients, they have always had success. And I have almost routinely seen what others call miracles. By having people only utilize real nutrition, which I call whole food, which the industry has called whole food. Mostly they've ignored it. But when it's addressed, it's called whole food nutrition. The truth is, if it isn't whole food nutrition, it's not nutrition, it's chemistry. And we are not chemical. Chemistry is part of us, but we're not just chemical beings. And we don't function that way. Plants do. Animals don't. Actually, there are some animals that have some minimal ability to process some of that. But it's still not anywhere near what plants do. Humans have virtually no ability to do so. What we get when we get reactions to these things, they're chemical reactions. Okay? And sometimes when the body is desperate for chromium, selenium, zinc, magnesium, name the substance, if the body is desperate, it will make a desperate stab of an attempt to use something that's not in a food form. And some people will get some results some of the time. Nobody will get results consistently. Some people get no results at all. In fact, most people don't get any results at all that way. Okay? Some people will get some, but that's the body's desperate attempt, and that only lasts for a while. It's interesting, there's a form of chromium called picolinate that's actually a slow poison. Okay? And people who have really severe sugar issues, if they take large quantities of that, some of them will have some response for a time. But it's a slow poison. Now, most people won't have a response to it at all, because the body really doesn't want it. But if it's desperate, people who have a desperate need or whose body is in a desperate state, the body will attempt to utilize it because it needs it so badly. But it doesn't work very well for very long for anybody, because it is literally a slow poison. Picolinic acid is a highly toxic acid substance. Promoters, because now they also have zinc picolinate. There's a couple other picolinates that they've tried to market. They haven't done very well sales-wise, which is good because none of them does any good, truly, living-wise. And they'll tell you picolinic acid it's natural, it's formed by the body. Well, that's true, but so is uric acid, urine. So is fecal matter. Could I introduce some chromium fecate? How about some chromium urate? Ma'am, would you like some of that? Well, it's natural. The body forms it. Yes, it's a waste product. Okay, picolinic acid is formed in the body in infinitely tiny amounts as a metabolic and waste product. And then some Dr. Frankenstein knucklehead got the idea, hey, let's take this and combine it with chromium. Okay? It doesn't work very well for anybody, and nobody should ever use it. It is literally a slow poison. And now they're using it with a few other, they've tried to, I don't know if they're still on the market, but I've in the past seen zinc picolinate and some other picolinates. That's poison. Okay? And that's not just rhetoric, that's fact. It's poison. Okay? So if your nutrients aren't food, they're not nutrients. There is a difference. And your body knows the difference between nutrients formed in life as only the Almighty can form them, versus all the rest that are made by man in his laboratory because he thinks he's so smart. And I want to give a background of that in brief before I address zinc. Zinc is very important, but people don't generally talk about it too much. It is removed about 50% from whole grains when they make white flour. So there's a big loss of it, but there's a lot of it in meats, and people tend to eat a lot of meat. So it doesn't generally get addressed as something that people need, even though it's recognized as an essential nutrient, but it doesn't get much attention. I don't give it a lot of attention because there are so many other things that are so much more deficient, that are so much more important. But for instance, when it comes to diabetes, is one example, one very prominent example actually. The key to diabetes, as discovered by the U.S. government National Institutes of Health 57 years ago, is the mineral chromium. Okay? That's the key. Okay? So when you get the right form of chromium, a whole food form, in the right amount, 100 micrograms 3 or 4 times a day, and these are all amounts determined by actual human research, human studies that very few people even know about. They haven't been promoted. Okay? So when you get the right form and the right amount of the right form of the right nutrients, then you get amazing results because that's what the body needs. Chromium is the most removed nutrient from the foods most Americans most commonly consume. And there is no nutrient that's been discovered to date that has more importance than that one does, and yet it's one of the very least known of all. And the U.S. government of the National Institutes of Health discovered and established it as an essential nutrient in 1959 for blood sugar metabolism. Hello, let's see, what is diabetes? It's a disorder of blood sugar metabolism. Hey, you think chromium might be helpful there? Okay, that should be a great big moment of duh. But for some reason it isn't. The reasons we can talk about all day long, we won't go into why it's not, but I've been working with it since the 70s and seeing people reduce their blood sugars that are out of control, get off their medications. I could say I've seen countless people reverse their diabetes, but I can't say that. Not because it isn't true, but because diabetes is officially incurable. So if your blood sugar level returns to normal after you've been diagnosed with diabetes, your medical record says you had diabetes. So you can never be free of diabetes because it's incurable. Even though you have no more symptoms of it anymore, even though your blood sugar is normal, without any medication, you still have diabetes because once a diabetic, always a diabetic, officially. Okay? But I have helped countless individuals through 5 decades eliminate their medications and have, actually I shouldn't say normal lives, they're better than normal because they're healthier than the average person. That being said, chromium's not the only player in the sugar game and with regard to diabetes. There are, for instance, the mineral selenium and silicon have lesser roles, and they are, those 3, chromium, selenium, and silicon, are the 3 most removed nutrients from the foods most Americans most commonly consume. And selenium and silicon play lesser roles. Selenium helps chromium to be more effective in its application, in many of its applications, including those that affect diabetes. Okay. Also, the mineral magnesium, which is about the 5th most removed nutrient in processing. Okay. Magnesium and the vitamin called B6 have an interrelationship, one with the other, in many different areas. One of them is in insulin response. Okay, so if you have a lack of magnesium, most people do, and a lack of B6, and most people do, well, that's another important part of blood sugar health that's going to be lacking. Now, the most important part is chromium. Now, here's a difficulty that I've had since the 70s. Chromium is so much more important than everything else that when people take just the right form of chromium, a whole food form, in the right amount, 100 micrograms 3 or 4 times a day, okay, and when they do that consistently, their blood sugars, their diabetes straightens out. But the truth is that's not the only problem. It's just the biggest problem. Because the lack of selenium and silicon plays a lesser role. The vitamin called B6 and magnesium deficiency plays actually a bigger role directly in diabetes than even the selenium and silicon that assist chromium. And zinc, which is about 50% removed from the foods most Americans most commonly consume. So there are a lot of factors involved. So most people will just take the chromium and they get great results. And everybody who has a blood sugar issue should be taking all of these items. But the chromium is the most important part. And when they find the right form and they take it in the right amount, the vast majority of the time they get results. So they don't do the rest of what they should do. Eventually, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, they could still start to have failings because the chromium, as important as it is, more than anything else, isn't the only thing, it's just the most important part. And zinc also. Well, why do diabetics, for instance, it's well documented medically, they have problems with not being able to recover from infection. Well, part of that is because selenium is the most important thing for your immune system, and when you have a chromium deficiency, you have a selenium deficiency. So that's part of it. But zinc also plays a very important role in your immune system. Now, when you are diabetic, you are zinc deficient. Why? Well, first of all, it is removed considerably from the diet. But also the reason that you don't get as much of it is because of processing of white flour and white sugar. Well, when they process white flour and white sugar, and also when people eat salt, a lot of salt, refined salt, there's a particular element that is elevated because the processing doesn't remove it, because it's what's called a heavy metal, so it's resistant to processing. The nutritive elements are in there are no exceptions to this. They're all lighter elements. Now, there are some of them that are a little heavier, but none of them are as heavy as cadmium, lead. The ones that we know, heavy metals are bad for you. Okay, none of those are nutrients. One of those, cadmium, there's an imbalance that is created. And cadmium displaces zinc and selenium. That's a matter of physics, which you have to get into the periodic table of elements and look at the way the valences are set up, and you'll see, oh, you've got selenium and zinc and cadmium in the same part of the table. That heavier cadmium displaces cadmium and selenium, which are already removed from the diets. So when you eat white flour, and who doesn't, and white sugar, and who doesn't, or at least hasn't for a significant part of their life, till they learned better 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years into their life, you already have low levels of zinc and selenium, and they're displaced by they're removed from the whole grain to make white flour. So you've taken out the zinc and the selenium, and the chromium, and the silicon, and the magnesium, and the B6, by the way. And what's left behind is cadmium that displaces what zinc and selenium you do have. Well, zinc is necessary for insulin production. Everybody knows about insulin, or at least they think they do. Now, everybody knows that insulin is important for diabetes, because that's the primary mode of treatment, especially in an advanced state. Okay? Well, insulin and chromium are cofactors. So when you put all your attention on one cofactor and you don't address the other one at all, well, they're cofactors. That means you need both of them. You only get one of them, and eventually that one's not going to work. The longer you rely more on that one and not at all on the other one because it isn't there, the less it's going to work. They call that insulin sensitivity. Okay? That phrase, new in the last 20 or so years, is a lie. Insulin is not sensitive. Oh, my feelings are hurt. I'm just not going to work. It's not sensitivity. Another lie is insulin resistance. Insulin is not saying, I'm not going to work. Get away from me. I'm just not going to do my job anymore. It's not a matter of resistance or sensitivity. It can't do its job without its partner. So the body can produce insulin because it's a hormone that the body creates with zinc. It can't produce chromium because that's a mineral. And if you don't have it, your body can't make any mineral. Chromium, selenium, calcium, iron. Those are elements that exist in the creation, and if they're not in a food form, your body doesn't really use them very well or at all. Okay? So your body keeps making insulin because it can make that hormone, and it uses what little zinc you have. So when someone's diabetic, their body has been creating insulin because it can at least do that at higher levels, so you have high blood sugar, because insulin is a carrier mechanism. It's really just a transport mechanism for sugar. So it's carrying it around the body, but without chromium, the cofactor function of chromium is to download the sugar from the insulin transport mechanism into the cell where energy is created and where life happens. Well, if you don't have the chromium, you're not unloading the sugar, so it's just running around the system and you're unloading less and less of it, which means you have less and less energy, diabetics. And you have high blood sugar, diabetics. And the body creates more insulin because there's more sugar to carry around because you're not using it because of lack of chromium. And you run out of zinc. Well, something else that zinc does is for the immune system. So diabetics don't heal well. It's because of a lack of chromium and selenium and silicon, yes. But the zinc has been dilapidated for a long time because it's the one thing the body can use to try and deal with the system, because it can create insulin. It can't create chromium. It can't create silicon. It can't create magnesium. It can't create selenium. But it can make an insulin molecule for a while until it runs out of zinc. So diabetics don't heal well because zinc is also important for the immune system. Zinc is important for the skin. That's why when diabetics get skin infections, they get gangrene, they have to cut their toes off, their feet off, cut their leg off at the knee. You know, part of that's a lack of chromium and lack of selenium, but part of it's a lack of zinc because it's not there, because it's been removed from the food, and what little you've gotten, the body has been utilizing. So these are all things every diabetic and, truthfully, every American needs. But chromium in the right form and the right amount is so effective that I usually can't get a diabetic to do everything. The exceptions to that are really severe diabetics. These are what are called usually brittle diabetics, or those of 10 years or longer. Uncontrolled diabetics, usually, in fact, I've never met a case where this isn't the case. An uncontrolled diabetic is one who doesn't do anything to control their diabetes. And then, oh, it's out of control! Well, that's like, as one classic person that I met who had been 20 years diabetic, and they were constantly changing their medication. When she was referred to me, she told me right out of the gate, I like white bread, I like macaroni and cheese, and I don't care what they say, I'm going to eat it. Till the day she died, she never quit eating those things, but she started taking whole food chromium, the right form, the right amount, as I told her to do. And magnesium and selenium and silicon and vitamin B6. And for the first time in 20 years, she was no longer out of control diabetic. And her doctor was stunned because her doctor had been telling her, she went to a specialist. And the specialist had been telling her, you know, you need to change your medications constantly, you need to make lifestyle changes. She said, well, I'm not changing anything. And the first time after 20 years, she came back with decreasing numbers in her out-of-control blood sugar testing. The doctor told her, as she told me about this right after the appointment, so the doctor said, well, I see you finally made some lifestyle changes, and you had to know salad. Sally was just real straight and in your face. And as she related to me, this is how she told me. She said, she came in and said, well, I see you finally made some lifestyle changes. She said, nah, I told her, nope. And that's just how Sally was. And the doctor laughed at her and said, well, the numbers don't lie. You've obviously made lifestyle changes. She said, well, I haven't. She said, you want to know what I did? The doctor said, yes, I do. She said, do you really want to know? The doctor said, yeah, I really want to know. She said, well, I found this guy. He told me about this whole food chromium. And the doctor cut her off at that point and said, oh, that doesn't work. And now, the gut initial response often of a medical person, whether it's a doctor or a nurse or somebody in the medical field, their initial response is often, oh, that doesn't work. Well, they're taught that it doesn't work. They don't know that it doesn't work. They're just taught that. And often when they look into things, people are using the wrong form, the wrong amount. It doesn't work. So when that's a common reaction. And sometimes there's some truth to it based on their perspective. It's not true based on real science, but based on their perspective it is. But this woman took it even farther. She said, oh, that doesn't work. And sometimes it makes it worse. There is no hope, at least up until that time. There's no study in the history of mankind that shows chromium makes diabetes worse in any form. Okay, so that was taking that initial response, oh, that doesn't work, and then embellishing it. Oh, sometimes it makes it worse. And Sally said, and I told her, well, that's all that I've done these last 3 months. And 3 months later, she went back, and her A1C, which had always been juggling between 10 and 11 usually, changing your medications around all the time, it went below 8 for the first time in 20 years. And after another year, it was below 7. The goal medically is to keep the A1C score, and I'm not going to cover what that is. People watch this there, you can look it up. The goal is to get it below 7. If they keep it below 7, they're like, okay, well, we're doing a good job. It's interesting because medicine actually keeps 2 sets of books. Now, in business, you go to jail for securities fraud or for accounting fraud if you kept 2 sets of books. But in medicine, they keep 2 sets of books often. And diabetes is one of the areas where they keep 2 sets of books. See, if your A1C is 4 or 5, that's called normal. And even if it approaches 6, 5.8, 5.9, even 6, they'll say, well, that's a little high, but that's within the range of normal. But once you've been diagnosed as diabetic, they put you into a different set of books. Now, again, remember earlier I said diabetes is incurable officially. You can't get rid of it officially. So now they say A1C normal for a diabetic is 6 or 7. Well, wait a minute. 4 or 5 is normal for humans, but so do you cease to be human when you're diabetic? Because now we have they run 2 sets of books. Well, she got hers below 8 and then down below 7. And after a year, she showed me the letter, and I have it in my file somewhere. I should dig it back out. She said, look at this, because they always called her with her results. And this time they sent her a letter. She thought that was odd for 20 years. Because see, after that first 3 months when the doctor said, I've got you now, you've changed your lifestyle. She said, nope. Till the day she died just a couple years ago. By the way, I gave her another, well, I didn't give her. She did what she needed to do. She lived another 10 years or 12 years after that, with her blood sugars largely under control. After some years, she just took the chromium only. She didn't do the other things. So she began to slip some, but she still did better than she had for 20 years before that. But after a year or so of doing this, after the first 3 months, the doctor is saying, oh, well, that doesn't work. At 6 months, at her second 3-month checkup, the doctor said, all right, well, it's working for you. Now, the doctor knew who I was. The doctor never said, hey, would you give me his number? I'd like to contact him so I can offer this to my other patients. Okay. The doctor's response was, well, okay, it's working for you. That's it. And you'd think she forgot about it, but she didn't. A year later, she brought me this letter. And it said her cholesterol, which had always been out of control. She didn't tell her it was under control, but the numbers she gave, her total cholesterol was below 200, her HDL was 55 or 60. I mean, all of her numbers were great, Her A1C was 6.7, and the end response of the letter was, these numbers are acceptable at this time. And I laughed. I said, acceptable at this time? That's the goal for a diabetic. In fact, for healthy people, if they had that cholesterol level, that HDL, they would say, great, the drugs are working. But she wasn't taking drugs. She was using whole food nutrition. Okay. But they just told her, your results are these numbers are acceptable at this time. And then a reminder to please contact our offices in 3 months for follow-up. Because that's really what it's all about, is keep you coming in, keep jumping the medications. Okay? Well, she didn't hear anything more. She went every 3 months, kept having great results. But when I read that letter, she said, yeah, but it's kind of odd, because the doctor told me she didn't want my A1C getting any lower. And I said, what? She told you she doesn't want lower than 6.7? She said, yeah, I didn't understand it. And immediately it struck me as she repeated it. I went, okay, well, you're not going to like this, but let me explain to you what she means. I said, this is a referral, right? She said, yeah, with her health program. It's a specialist. Okay? You have a specialist because you have a special need because you're out of control. If you get to where you're under control, below, even 6.7 for that matter, you won't qualify for her services any longer. So she doesn't want to get any lower because she'll lose you as a patient. That's the truth of modern medicine today and what it has been for decades in truth. And she, oh, well, the doctor didn't forget, because about 2 or 3 years later, I hadn't heard from Sally for a while. And I got a call out of the blue from her. And she said, oh, hi. I said, oh, how are you, Sally? She said, well, I'm all right, but I just got my latest blood work back, and my A1C is back up to 10. And I went, oh, well, so the nutrients aren't working anymore? She said, well, I quit taking them 3 months ago. I said, what? She said, yeah, I was trying to save some money. Okay, now, this woman, they had a horse ranch. They had more money than sense. But she was trying to save 20 bucks a month. You know, I mean, I wanted to tell her, if you skipped one diet soda a day, you could save the same amount of money. Because she still kept the same bad habits. She didn't change her lifestyle. She still ate the same garbage, but she got real nutrition in a potentiating form and in a therapeutic amount. So she quit. I actually think it was actually 6 months that she was off of it when she told me this. When she went into the doctor, which is when she called me, it was after the doctor had just talked with her, she said the doctor came out with her results and said, remember, this is like 3 or 4 years after telling her, okay, they're working for you, and never mentioned again. The doctor said to her, are you still taking those pills from that guy? And Sally said, I told him, nah, I've been trying to save some money. And the doctor said, you get back on those and you stay on them. So she didn't forget. She knew about them. She didn't tell anybody else. But when that patient, who for 20 years had been out of control, had now been under control for the better part of 4 years, she told her to get back on it. And she got back on it and stayed on it until, I don't know, it was 11 or 12 years before she finally died, after, you know, following what I told her to do. But see, she had her best results when she addressed everything, because she was out of control. The only people I've had that chromium alone didn't give them results are out of control diabetics, 10-year or more diabetics, 350 to 400 pound plus. You know, when they had extraordinary circumstances, grossly obese, long-term, not following any kind of diet at all, they got the same results everybody else got with just chromium, only when they addressed everything. Now the truth is, everybody, even not diabetics, should address all of these things. But if you're diabetic, you have an extra need to take 100 micrograms of whole food chromium 3 or 4 times a day. And selenium in the right form and the right amount, and silicon, and vitamin B6, and magnesium, and 1 zinc a day. So you don't need a lot of zinc. In fact, some people get carried away because they find out zinc is really good for the skin and for the immune system, and plays a role in the hair, and most people don't even know. Just before speaking tonight, I went and brushed up and went and looked up and went, let me just brush up. 40 years ago, there are National Institutes of Health studies that showed zinc is necessary for production of insulin. And so they've known this for decades. They don't talk about it. Okay? So you need to have that, but you just need one a day, because if you get too much zinc, it throws off your copper relationship. And when it comes to minerals, sometimes ratios are important. And too much of one can throw another one off. That's not very often, but there are some cases, and one of those is with zinc. So I tell people, just take one a day. Even of the old, there actually are a few different zincs that are whole food. The last time I looked, I've worked with just one in particular because it works better than all the other ones. But there are a few. As long as whole food, I tell people, I don't care. Just get a whole food zinc. Most zinc that people take is zinc gluconate, zinc sulfate, or some other, or the zinc picolinate that was out a few years ago, and maybe it still is. Okay, those are junk and trash. And again, let me give you a diagram here. Well, I'm going to tell you about it because you can't see it anyway. But this on the bottom is, on the left-hand column, this is zinc, what's called USP, United States Pharmacopoeia. Okay, that's the zinc that you buy off of any store shelf at Walmart or the pharmacy or even the vast majority of all health food stores. Okay, that's just rock, it's junk. It's not only is it not of any use, it's actually long-term, has subtle side effects. So nobody should ever take that. It's junk, it's trash. But nobody should ever take anything that's not food. So that's not really saying a whole lot other than it's worthless at best. Okay, if next to it is zinc, how it occurs in food. Now, the doctor and the chemist and the biochemist and the pharmacist and all the people that are supposed to be smart will tell you there's no difference between one form of zinc and the other. It's just some people react better to one than to another. They're all the same. Well, they're not the same. And this shows, if you could see this, it's the same for every other nutrient, by the way. I have a couple of others listed here. Thiamine is called vitamin B1. The vitamin that's called C. And I have other pictures like this, 100,000 magnification for an electron microscope. When you look under a microscope at the USP, which really that should just mean United States poison, because that's really what USP is about when it comes to nutrition. It's worthless garbage. Okay, that's the form that man makes. Well, when you look at the form that man makes, it's large, misshapen, rectangular boulders. When you look at the way that it's found in food, it's in very tiny, smooth, small, spherical balls. Now, without even getting into the science, which I will in a minute, just common sense would tell you, okay, what do you think would get into your cells across your cell wall easier, better, more efficiently? Small, smooth, spherical balls, or large, jagged, misshapen, rectangular boulders? Just common sense alone would tell you, would give you a good idea which way's the right way to go. Before we even get into the scientific aspect of it, well, I have here, let me look on, this is a specialized publication for professionals that hardly any professionals even have. This is a study on zinc in a food form compared to zinc gluconate, zinc orotate, chelated zinc, zinc sulfate, and food zinc. Zinc that has been grown so that it's incorporated into the life cycle and made into a bioavailable form. And in both animal studies and human studies, the food form of zinc is from about 2 to 3 times utilized by the body than any other form is. But the chemist, the doctor, whoever will tell you, there's no difference. Well, as I started earlier, there is a difference. And your body knows the difference between real nutrition. And again, that's a redundancy. I shouldn't have to say real nutrition. It should be universally understood. When you say nutrient, it's an item which is in the food supply. But the vast majority of everything that's labeled nutrient is not food. It's a chemical that's been extracted. Now, chelated minerals became popular. They still are very popular, actually. In order for your body to utilize minerals, they have to have what scientifically is called a protein chaperone. They have to be attached to amino acids. Now, that occurs in foods. Your body complexes them in the body. So some men thinking themselves smart went, oh, well, we'll just take these, whatever, zinc, manganese, magnesium, name the mineral, and we'll go in the laboratory with these rocks, because that's what they're using. And then we'll take some amino acids that are fake, we created them ourselves artificially, and through a complex series of chemical reactions, we will cause them artificially to combine. And they say that's what a chelated mineral is. It's a naturally occurring, as in rock, with an artificially created amino acid. Proteins are made of amino acids. That's called food. If it's in food, that's what it is. If you make it in a laboratory, it's not food. So we take these two items and we forcibly cause them to combine because we think we're so smart. And when they test those forms against the rock alone, the body will actually get fooled into utilizing the chelated one a little more than the non-chelated one. So they declare, ta-da, that shows that chelated works. Well, that shows you can trick the body. You can force the body to utilize something that it needs because it's not getting it in the form that it actually needs. But when you compare chelated minerals to the same mineral in food, it's no comparison. What the body wants is real. Again, I have to say real nutrients, whole food nutrients. And I shouldn't have to do that, but people don't know. As I started off a couple of years ago, the beginning of the year, it was big news that 5% of all nutrient sales in the industry were now whole food. And some people, of course, got confused. Oh, you mean Whole Foods market controls 5%? No, they don't. Okay? But they're talking about nutrients from food, except the problem is, again, backtracking a bit, when I started looking 10 years ago at some of the companies beginning to market whole food, because I've been doing this since the 70s, and not many people have been listening, hardly at all. That's why after almost 40 years, we've got 5% of the marketplace. Except in truth, it's like half that amount or less. Because when I started looking at these whole food nutrients, and people started telling me, aren't you excited? People are becoming more aware. And I went, not really. Oh, you're not? I said, no. Because when I look at the products, it's the same old trash that they've always marketed. But on the bottom, it says, and it contains 100 milligrams of carrot, and or 100 milligrams of spirulina, or 100 milligrams of some berry, or some fruit, or some vegetable. So legally, they're allowed to, on the label, put whole food, multivitamin, multimineral. Because it does contain a small amount of food, but when you then read the label, the vitamin A is beta-carotene, which is synthetic, unless it says carrot, which shows it's from food. Or it's palmitate, which is a synthetic, or palmitic acid. The vitamin Bs are petrochemicals. You have to know how to read the label to know that, and the vast majority of them are. The vitamin C is ascorbic acid. They make that from white sugar that they then treat with several caustic acids in a very cheap process to cause the sugar, the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen makeup of sugar, to be manipulated to mimic the form that substance is found in nature. So it looks similar, but again, if you actually hold them up next to each other, they're chemically similar, or maybe identical, not really, but close. but physically they're completely different. Biochemically, they're completely different. And the body utilizes them completely different. So when you read the label, it's still the same trash. But because of legalities, they're allowed to call this a whole food product. It's not 100% whole food. It has a small amount of whole food. So a few years ago, when it said 5% is now whole food, in truth, it was less than half of that. Because most of those are people that are jumping on the bandwagon because we've got a few more people listening. So big names that I would know, you would know if I mentioned them. At least at this point I won't mention them, but I can document, and I do privately talk about them sometimes. One of the biggest names of all has some great information on the superiority of whole food nutrition, and that you should only use whole food nutrients. And he makes millions of dollars selling products that are full of synthetics. Okay? So either he's too stupid to understand the difference of the truth that he's saying and the product he's marketing, or he's dishonest. Take your choice. I don't want to buy anything from somebody who's lying to me or too stupid to do what he tells you should do. Okay? So, and I can document that. It's well documented. Marketing. Last month I addressed marketing. Why do we do what we do? Marketing. If you deal strictly in truth, what is nutrition? It's from food. So when the doctor or the medical official tells you, or a professional says, your nutrients should come from food, he's actually right, but he doesn't realize how he's right. Your nutrients should come from food. But they're removed substantially from the foods most Americans most commonly consume. So people go and take pills that he's right, you shouldn't take those. But not because you don't need those nutrients, it's because those called nutrients actually aren't. So, as in the case with Sally, more than 10 years ago, with her doctor telling her, oh, that doesn't work. Because usually they don't, because they're not really food. Okay? And so they don't really have a perspective on food nutrients, even though they'll tell you your nutrients should come from food. What they mean is you should just eat your foods and come to us to be healthy, even though they don't make you healthy, they just manage disease. Okay? Hopefully they manage it to varying levels of efficacy. So real nutrition, and again, I hate even having to say whole food nutrient or real nutrition, because it should be a universal truth, because in reality, it is a universal truth. If a nutrient isn't food, it's not a nutrient. So, when I was asked to address zinc, I wanted to address, zinc is important, but it's one of the few items you can't really say, wow, that's really important. I'm going to take a bunch of those. Well, you'll throw your copper metabolism off, which plays some important roles in your blood and in your immune system, so you don't want to do that. Okay? And truthfully, you don't need a lot of zinc, but the fact that we get cadmium, oh, by the way, not just from eating white flour, white sugar, and refined white table salt, you get high levels of cadmium. One of the highest sources is cigarette smoke, cigarettes. So people who smoke get even more cadmium. Okay? And then factory exhaust is rich in cadmium. Car exhaust. So we're exposed to cadmium on a lot of levels. And that cadmium displaces zinc. And selenium. Okay, so we need zinc a little bit. And it would be good, well, let's put it this way, it wouldn't be harmful for anybody to take one of these a day, or one of the other few actual whole food zinc products, and I'm not going to name them because I'm not sure which one's currently on the marketplace. I know of one, Garden of Life zinc is actually whole food zinc. I don't know what else they have in it, but I have, through 4 decades, worked with Megafood Zinc and know how it works. There used to be some others, they've quit making whole food zinc now as a separate item. There are a lot of places you can find it as a small amount of a multi, but to get zinc by itself, there's only a few companies that do that with a food form. And if it isn't food, it's not a nutrient. It's just a rock, or a chemical compound created in the laboratory from rock. Okay? So it's very important to understand, in every case, there are no exceptions. nutrients in a food form always test out more available, bioavailable than non-food forms, always. There's one sort of exception. The substance called folic acid, which by the way really isn't a nutrient. The nutrient is folate. You can't find folic acid in food anywhere. Folic acid is the man-made form. And the form that's found in food is a different construct. It's called folate. Now, if you take folic acid, your body will actually receive that more readily than it will folate. It's the only exception, except it really isn't an exception, because the body excretes it at a much higher rate than folate. So the net result is your body utilizes folate at a higher, more efficient rate than it does folic acid. But folic acid is the only one that technically the body does accept at a higher rate than the food form, but it doesn't use it. So across the board, if your nutrients are not food or from food, they're not nutrients. So for zinc, blood sugar metabolism, it's vital for insulin production, which you need to use sugar, along with chromium that gets ignored. It's very important for the immune system. That's why diabetics have a hard time healing. It's very important for the skin. That's why when they get cuts, when they get abrasions, they don't heal well, because their immune system is depressed because of a lack of zinc and selenium and chromium, by the way. And their skin is not as healthy because of a lack of zinc and silicon, by the way, which is even more important to the skin health than zinc is. So it wouldn't hurt anybody to take one a day. Do I take one a day? No, but I have a long, decades experience eating good, healthful foods. So I don't have a need to. Would it hurt me? No. It wouldn't mess anything up if I did. I just don't because I don't need to. But if you have blood sugar issues, if you have skin issues, if you have immune issues, take one a day of Megafood Zinc or one of the few other whole food zinc. And if you're taking any other zinc, stop. The body virtually doesn't use it. Long term, there are side effects. They're small. It's not like drugs are going to kill you. But they're not useful, so quit taking them. So, whole food nutrition. Again, I hate having to say whole food nutrition or real nutrition, because it should just be, well, it is a universal truth. A nutrient isn't a nutrient if it wasn't grown. Period. But we have to use these terms, whole food or real or raw nutrients. If a nutrient wasn't grown, it's not a nutrient. Period. Thank you for your time. Until next month, next time, whatever we decide to talk about then. This is NotADoc. I'm NotADoc. I'm proud to be NotADoc. My name is my disclaimer. I'm NotADoc. So I'm telling you right up front, I'm proud of that. Not against doctors. Some people get confused about that. They just should be used intelligently rather than willy-nilly at the drop of a hat, and recognized for their limitations, which they do have, much more than people know. So thank you again for your time, and good night.